What if I told you that on a spring day in 2022, a tractor built over a century ago sold for more money than the fanciest, most high-tech modern farm machine you can buy today? Not just a little more, nearly 3 times more. $1.47 million for a tractor. And here's the kicker. It wasn't some restored showpiece sitting pretty in a climate-controlled barn. It was a working machine, a beast of iron and brass that once pulled plows through frozen Midwestern soil when your great-grandfather was probably still in diapers. This is the story of the 1913 Case 3060, the most valuable collector's tractor in the world, and the tale of how American ingenuity turned steam and steel into something worth more than most people's houses. In the summer of 1842, a 23-year-old man named Jerome Case left his family's farm in upstate New York with 6 crude threshing machines loaded onto a wagon. He'd bought them on credit, betting everything on a dream that farmers in the Wisconsin Territory would pay good money to thresh their wheat faster than human hands could manage. Jerome didn't come from wealth or privilege. His father, Caleb Case, sold primitive grain separation devices imported from England, and young Jerome had spent his teenage years operating these contraptions for neighbors, learning their every flaw and possibility. By 1840, he was running his own small threshing business. But the real money, he figured, was out west, where wheat grew tall and thick across endless prairie. So he packed up those 6 machines and headed toward what would become one of the great American industrial stories. Jerome's journey took him first to Chicago by steamship, then overland through mud and wilderness to Rochester in the Wisconsin Territory. Rochester was supposed to be the beating heart of wheat country, a place where farmers desperately needed the kind of machine Jerome was hauling. That first autumn, he worked one of his threshers in the fields, taking payment from farmers while making mental notes about every inefficiency, every breakdown, every place where the design fell short. And there were plenty. These early threshers were temperamental beasts, prone to jamming, slow as molasses, and requiring multiple operators. But Jerome saw something everyone else missed. He saw that if you could combine the threshing and separating functions into one machine, if you could make the straw move to one end while the grain fell cleanly underneath, you could revolutionize farming itself. It wasn't just about making money, though. He certainly wanted that. It was about changing the fundamental relationship between man and land. By 1844, Jerome had refined his design enough to start manufacturing, but Rochester didn't want him. When he approached the town about water power rights to run a proper factory, they turned him down flat. So Jerome hitched a pair of horses to his prototype, rolled east to a lakeside town called Racine, and rented a small shop near the docks. That decision, that moment when a young man with big dreams got told no and decided to go somewhere else, that's where everything began. Within 3 years, Jerome Case was operating out of his own 3-story brick factory, cranking out threshing machines that farmers across the Midwest were lining up to buy. By 1848, he was producing 100 machines a year and claiming he could only meet half the orders he received. The name Case was becoming synonymous with innovation, reliability, and American agricultural power. Jerome wasn't just a businessman. He was a tinkerer, an improver, someone who couldn't leave well enough alone. In 1863, he brought in 3 trusted employees as partners, Messina Erskine, Robert Baker, and Stephen Bull, officially forming the J.I. Case Company. This was during the Civil War, when demand for food exploded, and the labor shortage meant farmers needed mechanical help more than ever. Case machines kept American farms productive when sons and fathers were off fighting. By 1869, Jerome's Eclipse thresher combined multiple new attachments into one revolutionary package, boosting capacity and requiring one less person to operate. It was incremental improvement after incremental improvement, each one building on the last, each one making farming just a little bit easier, a little bit more profitable. And then came steam. The first Case portable steam engine rolled out in 1869, designed to power those threshing machines without relying on horses or human muscle. By 1876, Case had developed its first self-propelled traction engine, a mobile powerhouse that could move itself from field to field, and was awarded a gold medal at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. These weren't delicate machines. They were fire-breathing monsters, 10 or 15 or even 50 horsepower units that transformed what American farms could accomplish. Case built engines in every size imaginable, from the modest 9 horsepower models up to the standard 15, 25, 30, 40, 50, and 65 horsepower machines, all the way to the 75 and 80 horsepower plowing giants. They even built massive 110 horsepower braking engines with iconic 2-story cabs and 9 colossal 150 horsepower hauling engines that looked like something from a Jules Verne novel. By the start of the 20th century, Case was the most prolific North American builder of steam engines, with 36,000 steamers bearing the Case Eagle logo by the time production ended. That eagle, by the way, came from Old Abe, the mascot of the 8th Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry Regiment that Jerome met returning from the Civil War in 1865. It became one of the most recognizable symbols in American agriculture, stamped on smoke boxes and engine housings from Wisconsin to California, from Texas to the Dakotas. Jerome himself became wealthy beyond measure, founding banks, breeding champion racehorses, serving in the Wisconsin State Senate, and becoming mayor of Racine 3 times. When he died in December of 1891, the entire city draped itself in mourning for one of America's industrial pioneers. But the company he built was just getting started. In the early 1900s, everyone at Case could see the writing on the wall. Steam power was incredible, transformative even, but internal combustion was the future. Gasoline engines were lighter, more efficient, didn't require massive water tanks and coal supplies, and could be started without spending an hour building up steam pressure. Case engineers had been experimenting with gas engines since the 1890s, tinkering in back rooms and workshops, trying to figure out how to harness controlled explosions inside cylinders to replace the external combustion of steam. It wasn't simple. These early gasoline engines were finicky, unreliable, prone to backfiring and stalling. But by 1910, Case had cracked the code enough to release their first gasoline tractor, simply called the Case 60. The Case 60 was a revelation and a beast. Its basic construction followed steam tractor principles because that's what the engineers knew. But instead of a firebox and boiler, it featured a 2-cylinder horizontal gasoline engine with 1,884 cubic inches of displacement. That's 30.9 liters, for context, bigger than most modern truck engines by a factor of 10. This engine was rated at 60 horsepower on the belt pulley, though farmers quickly learned that real-world performance varied wildly depending on load, fuel quality, and whether mercury was in retrograde. The 60 was massive, weighing in at around 25,800 pounds, just shy of 13 tons. Its rear drive wheels stood 6 feet in diameter, great iron and steel wheels that could crush a man's leg without even slowing down. It used kerosene for fuel, which was cheaper than gasoline and widely available, and it turned at just 365 revolutions per minute. The cooling system held an almost unbelievable 680 quarts of water. Farmers loved it and feared it in equal measure. But the 60 was just the beginning. Case engineers knew they needed something even bigger, even more powerful, something that could handle the largest farms in America, where wheat stretched to every horizon, and breaking new prairie sod required more power than any team of horses could provide. So, in 1912, they introduced an evolution of the design, the model that would become legendary among tractor collectors nearly a century later. They called it the 3060, and it changed everything. The 3060 designation meant 30 horsepower at the drawbar and 60 horsepower at the belt pulley. That belt, by the way, was over a foot wide and 32 inches in diameter, capable of powering threshing machines, sawmills, grain elevators, or any other stationary equipment a farmer might need. The tractor itself stretched 223 inches long, 105 inches wide, and stood 126 inches tall. It was a rolling monument to American industrial capability. Under that massive frame sat one of the most incredible engines ever built for agricultural use. 2 horizontal cylinders, each with a 10-inch bore and 12-inch stroke, combined for that 1,884 cubic inch displacement. These weren't high-revving modern engines. They turned at just 350 revolutions per minute, each piston stroke a deliberate, thunderous event that you could feel in your chest from 50 yards away. The crankshaft delivered power through a single-speed transmission to the rear axle. There were no gears to shift, no complicated clutch work. You pointed it where you wanted to go and hoped it got there. Top speed was around 2 miles per hour under load, maybe 3 if you were on level ground with a light pull. But that wasn't the point. The point was lugging power, the ability to pull massive loads through thick soil hour after hour without complaint. Each stroke of that crankshaft was a power stroke, alternating between cylinders in a rhythm that became hypnotic to anyone who worked around these machines. Building a 3060 wasn't like stamping out modern tractors on an assembly line. These were hand-built machines, each one requiring skilled craftsmen to cast the engine blocks, machine the cylinders, fit the bearings, and assemble the complex valve trains. Many components were actually cast from patterns originally designed for steam tractors, repurposed for this new gasoline age. The wooden platform cab with its steel canopy provided minimal weather protection for the operator. But nobody expected comfort in 1913. You expected power, reliability, and the ability to get work done that would be impossible by hand. The 3060 delivered on all counts. Its fuel tank held 90 gallons of kerosene, enough for a full day's work if you were careful with the throttle. Starting the beast required hand cranking the flywheel until compression caught and those massive pistons began their deliberate march. On cold mornings, you might be cranking for 10 minutes or more, building up a sweat before the real work even began. From 1912 through 1916, Case built fewer than 500 of these 3060 tractors. The price was $2,500, which doesn't sound like much until you adjust for inflation and realize that's about $72,000 in modern money. For a farmer in 1913, that was a staggering sum, more than most men earned in 5 years. You had to be running serious acreage to justify that kind of investment. But for those who could afford it, the 3060 was a game changer. One machine could do the work of 20 horses, and it didn't need to eat when it wasn't working, didn't get sick, didn't need a barn or a farrier. You fed it kerosene and water, adjusted the ignition timing, and it pulled dawn to dusk without complaint. Stories spread across the Midwest of 3060s, pulling 6-bottom plows through virgin prairie, breaking sod that had never seen a blade, opening new farmland at a pace that would have been impossible just a generation earlier. These tractors worked on farms from Wisconsin to Montana, from the Dakotas down through Kansas and Nebraska. They powered threshing crews that moved from farm to farm during harvest season, setting up on the edge of wheat fields and processing grain from sunrise to well past dark. The belt pulley on the side of the tractor would spin at precisely the right speed to drive the threshing machine, separating wheat from chaff with mechanical precision, while farmers and hired hands fed bundles into the machine and bagged the resulting grain. At night, you could hear a 3060 running from miles away, that distinctive 2-cylinder rhythm echoing across empty prairie. It was the sound of progress, of America feeding itself and the world, of small farmers becoming agricultural entrepreneurs with the help of mechanical power they could barely comprehend. But the 3060 had its quirks and dangers. That enormous engine turning at low RPM generated incredible torque, and if something went wrong, if a plow blade hit a buried rock or a belt suddenly tightened, the whole machine could lurch violently. Operators learned to keep their hands away from moving parts, to never trust that the machine was truly stopped even when the engine was silent, to respect the raw mechanical power they were controlling. Accidents happened. Fingers were crushed, arms were broken, men were thrown from the operator's platform when wheels hit hidden stumps. The 3060 wasn't malicious, but it wasn't forgiving either. It demanded attention, respect, and a healthy dose of fear. Those who treated it carelessly usually only made that mistake once. The golden era of the Case 3060 was brief but brilliant. Between 1912 and 1916, these tractors represented the absolute pinnacle of American agricultural engineering. They were the biggest, most powerful, most capable machines most farmers had ever seen. When a 3060 rolled into a farmyard for the first time, it was an event. Neighbors came from miles around to see the mechanical marvel, to watch it pull loads that would have required a dozen horse teams, to hear that thunderous engine note that spoke of power and possibility. For many farmers, owning a 3060 was like owning a piece of the future. It meant you were serious, committed, ready to take farming into the 20th century with both hands. These weren't toys or experiments. They were working machines that earned their keep every single day. During World War I, American agriculture kept the Allied forces fed, and tractors like the 3060 played a crucial role. With so many young men overseas, farms needed mechanical help more than ever. The 3060 could keep operating with a single experienced operator and maybe one assistant, doing work that would have required a full crew in the horsepower days. They broke new ground for wheat production, helped harvest bumper crops that fed American troops and European allies, and proved that mechanized farming wasn't just a novelty, but a necessity. Case shipped these tractors across America and even overseas, with 3060s working in Russia, Argentina, and Canada, bearing the Case Eagle logo into fields around the world. But nothing in American manufacturing lasts forever, especially when technology moves as fast as it did in the early 20th century. By the time World War I ended in 1918, the agricultural landscape was already changing. Smaller, lighter tractors were coming to market, machines that were more affordable, easier to operate, and better suited to diversified farming rather than massive wheat operations. Henry Ford's Fordson was selling for under $400 by the early 1920s, making tractor ownership accessible to farmers who could never afford a 3060. Case itself was moving toward more modern designs, tractors with multiple gears, better power-to-weight ratios, and features that made them practical for smaller farms. The 3060's size and weight, once its greatest advantages became liabilities. It was overkill for most farm tasks, expensive to operate, difficult to transport, and increasingly obsolete as agricultural practices evolved. By 1916, Case had already stopped production. The company built just about 500 of these machines in total, a tiny production run even by the standards of the day. Most farmers who owned 3060s kept them running for decades, repairing and rebuilding engines, fabricating replacement parts when originals wore out. Because even though newer tractors were available, there was still work that only a 3060 could do. They became heritage machines, passed down through families, symbols of an earlier era when farming required more courage than capital, and when mechanical innovation happened in workshops and factories rather than computer labs. By the 1920s and 30s, many 3060s had been retired to back corners of farm properties, too valuable to scrap but too old-fashioned to use regularly. Some were cannibalized for parts to keep other machines running. Some were sold for scrap during the metal drives of World War II, melted down to become tanks and ships and aircraft. A few were kept by sentimental farmers who remembered what these machines had meant, what they had made possible. And slowly, year by year, the population of surviving 3060s dwindled. By the 1950s and 60s, when the first wave of serious tractor collectors began preserving agricultural history, finding an intact 3060 was already a challenge. Most had been scrapped, abandoned, or left to rust in forgotten sheds. The few that remained became highly sought-after prizes. Collectors began to understand that the 3060 represented something more than just an old tractor. It was the first gasoline tractor Case ever built, the machine that launched one of America's most successful agricultural companies into the internal combustion age. It was a bridge between steam and modern power, a technological stepping stone that made everything else possible. Its massive size and distinctive design made it instantly recognizable, and its rarity made it nearly unobtainable. By the 1980s and 90s, serious tractor collectors knew that owning a 3060 was the holy grail, the ultimate achievement in preserving agricultural heritage. But finding one for sale was like spotting a unicorn. Today, experts believe only 5 Case 3060 tractors still exist in the entire world. 5 machines out of the original 493. Think about those odds. Less than 1% survival rate after more than a century. 2 are owned by museums that will never sell. 2 are held in private collections by families who have owned them for generations and show no interest in parting with them. That leaves exactly 1, the tractor that once belonged to a well-known collector in central Iowa, a man who spent decades assembling one of the finest collections of early agricultural machinery in America. When he passed away, his family faced a difficult decision: keep the collection together, which would be nearly impossible, or sell it and let other collectors preserve these machines. They chose to sell. In April of 2022, that decision led to one of the most extraordinary moments in agricultural collecting history. Aumann Auctions, a company that specializes in vintage power equipment and had already set one world record by selling a 1910 Marshall Colonial Class C tractor for $535,000 3 years earlier, announced they would be auctioning the Iowa Collector's Case 3060 at their annual Pre-30 auction. This is an event that brings together the most serious collectors of early tractors from around the world, people who understand the historical significance of these machines and have the resources to preserve them properly. When news spread that an authentic, operational 3060 was coming to market, the tractor collecting world took notice. Kurt Aumann, the auctioneer who had handled the previous world record sale, knew this was going to be special. The 3060 had been meticulously restored. The engine had been completely rebuilt. New sheet metal had been fabricated where originals were too far gone. The cabin radiator had been reworked, and it wore a professional paint job that gleamed under the auction lights. More importantly, it still ran. After over a century, you could hand crank that flywheel, wait for compression to catch, and hear those massive pistons come to life with that unmistakable two-cylinder beat. For collectors, that running engine was everything. This wasn't a static display piece. It was a working time machine. On April 21st, 2022, bidding opened. Kurt Aumann stood at the podium, looking out at a crowd that knew they were witnessing history. The auction was conducted online, with serious collectors from across North America and even overseas participating remotely. Bidding started strong and never slowed down. $50,000 came and went in seconds. $100,000, $200,000, $500,000. The previous tractor record of $535,000 was shattered without anyone even pausing. $750,000, $1 million. And still, the bidding continued. Aumann later admitted they didn't expect the tractor to bring anything like this kind of money, but two bidders had locked in, neither willing to back down, both understanding this might be their only chance in a lifetime to own a Case 3060. When the digital gavel finally fell, the price was $1,470,000, $1.47 million, for a tractor. The auction hall erupted. Kurt Aumann's voice cracked slightly as he announced the final price, the highest ever paid for any tractor, antique or modern, anywhere in the world. Even the most expensive brand new Case IH Quad-Track, the top-of-the-line modern machine with GPS guidance and computer-controlled implements, sells for around $600,000. The 3060, built when Woodrow Wilson was president and World War I was still raging, had just sold for nearly 2.5 times that amount. The buyer, it turned out, was a museum in Connecticut that had spent years assembling a complete collection of early Case tractors. They owned every model, every variation, every significant machine Case had built in those pioneering years, except for one. The 3060 was the missing piece, the one gap in their collection that they desperately wanted to fill. For them, price was almost irrelevant compared to the opportunity to complete the historical record. The tractor would be carefully transported east, restored to museum-quality condition if needed, and placed on permanent display where future generations could see and appreciate what American agricultural engineering looked like at the dawn of mechanized farming. This sale did more than just set a record. It put antique tractors on the same level as classic cars in the collecting world. Kurt Aumann mentioned that after the sale, high-end car collector magazines called him for the first time ever, wanting to know about tractors, about this world where century-old machines commanded seven-figure prices. The sale proved that these early tractors aren't just farm equipment. They're rolling sculptures, mechanical art pieces that represent innovation, determination, and the American spirit of making things better than we found them. Every casting, every gear, every bolt tells a story about the men who designed and built these machines and the farmers who bet their livelihoods on unproven technology. The 1913 Case 3060 matters because it represents a pivotal moment in American history. It's the point where farming stopped being purely about human and animal labor and became about mechanical power. It's the moment when a company that had built its reputation on steam power successfully transitioned to internal combustion and set the stage for a century of innovation. It's a reminder that the Midwest wasn't just flyover country, but the cradle of technologies that changed the world. Every farmer in America today, working from the cab of a modern tractor with air conditioning and satellite navigation, owes a debt to the engineers who figured out how to make those two massive cylinders turn reliably, how to harness controlled explosions to pull steel through soil, how to build something that could survive decades of brutal use and still start on a cold morning. The 3060 also represents the best of American manufacturing at a time when that phrase meant something different than it does today. These tractors were built by skilled craftsmen in Racine, Wisconsin, using American steel, American ingenuity, and American determination to solve problems. They weren't perfect. They were dangerous, difficult to operate, expensive, and temperamental. But they worked. They got the job done. They helped feed a nation and win a world war. And somehow, miraculously, 5 of them survived long enough for us to remember and appreciate what they represented. If you drive through farm country today, especially in the Midwest, you might occasionally spot an old tractor sitting in a field or beside a barn, slowly returning to the earth as rust and weather take their toll. Most of them are forgotten, considered junk by people who don't know any better, but every once in a while someone recognizes what they're looking at. Someone understands that this particular pile of iron and steel is actually a piece of history, a mechanical time capsule that deserves preservation. That's what the collector community does. They rescue these machines, restore them to working condition, and make sure future generations can see and hear and understand what farming used to be like. The Case 3060's record-breaking sale has already inspired other collectors to take their restoration projects more seriously, to invest more time and money in doing things right, to document and preserve agricultural history before it disappears completely. Museums are paying more attention to early tractors, recognizing that these machines deserve the same respect and care as classic cars or historic aircraft. The pre-30 auction has grown each year, attracting more collectors, more consignments, and more attention from people who understand that agricultural history is American history and that preserving it matters. What makes the 3060 so special isn't just its size or its power or even its rarity. It's the fact that it still exists at all. Against all odds, through depression and war, and changing technology and simple neglect, 5 of these machines survived. They survived because someone somewhere along the line decided they were worth saving. Maybe it was a farmer who couldn't bear to scrap his first tractor. Maybe it was a son who remembered his father's pride in that big case. Maybe it was a collector who saw beyond the rust and oil leaks to the historical significance underneath. Whoever they were, wherever they were, they made a choice that eventually led to a Connecticut museum paying nearly $1.5 million to add one more chapter to the story. The 3060 also reminds us that value isn't always about utility. Sure, you could theoretically still use one of these tractors for farm work, though you'd be insane to risk $1 million machine that way. But its real value lies in what it represents, what it teaches us about where we came from and how we got here. It's a three-dimensional history lesson that you can touch and hear and smell. When that engine fires up and those massive pistons start their deliberate rhythm, you're not just hearing a tractor. You're hearing Jerome Case's dream made real, hearing the ambitions of countless farmers who bet on machinery over muscle, hearing America's transformation from an agricultural society to an industrial powerhouse. That's worth preserving. That's worth celebrating. And apparently, that's worth $1.47 million. Looking forward, the question becomes what happens to these 5 remaining 3060s? 2 are safely preserved in museums. 1 just joined the Connecticut collection. That leaves 2 in private hands, and eventually, those machines will come to market too. Will they exceed the record set in 2022? It's possible, especially if collectors continue entering the hobby and demand continues rising while supply remains absolutely fixed. But it's also possible that the 2022 sale represents a unique moment, a perfect combination of circumstances, provenance, and competitive bidding that might not be replicated. Either way, the 3060 has secured its place in collecting history. The story of the Case 3060 is ultimately a story about American optimism and ingenuity. It's about a young man who left New York with 6 threshing machines and built an empire. It's about engineers who weren't content with good enough and kept pushing for better. It's about farmers who trusted their futures to experimental technology. It's about a company that dominated its industry for decades by consistently out-innovating the competition. And it's about collectors who understand that some things are worth more than money, that preserving history is a responsibility we owe to future generations. The most valuable collector's tractor in the world isn't valuable because of what it can do today. It's valuable because of what it represents about who we were and how far we've come. Have you ever worked on an old tractor? Maybe helped your grandfather maintain some vintage iron? Or watched one of these beasts fire up at a farm show? There's something magical about hearing a century-old engine come to life, feeling that vibration through your boots, smelling the kerosene and hot oil, and knowing that farmers 3 generations ago felt and heard and smelled the exact same things. The Case 3060 represents the absolute pinnacle of that experience, the biggest and rarest and most significant tractor from an era when mechanical innovation was changing America faster than anyone could have imagined. If you enjoyed this story about American agricultural history and the machines that transformed our world, subscribe for more forgotten legends that shape the country we live in today. Because every piece of old iron sitting in a field has a story, and some of those stories are worth $1.47 million.